She was simply known as the janitor. They ridiculed her for reading while she worked. Then they were stunned when she delivered the valedictorian speech at graduation, revealing everything. At Larchmont Hills Academy, everyone recognized Olivia Cranston and Camille Strathmore. It was understood. They were the daughters of families who traveled by private plane and ate at restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. Their presence in a room prompted people to either rise or avert their gaze, a reaction born of habit, fear, or envy. They weren't malicious, not precisely, but they understood early on that kindness wasn't essential. Politeness was a choice. Deference? It was reserved for individuals who could provide something in return. And for someone like Janice Albury, the reserved black woman with gentle eyes and rough hands, there was no advantage to be found. Janice had been employed at the school for nearly 2 years. Each weekday, she arrived before sunrise and departed well after the final SUV had exited the gated parking lot. She scrubbed the floors, shined the trophies in the main hall, and ensured the restrooms were fresh. She seldom spoke unless addressed, and her voice, when she did, was as tranquil as a still pond. But Camille observed something one day during lunch break. She had forgotten her phone in the chemistry lab, and hurrying back, she noticed Janice in an empty classroom, not tidying, but looking through a large biology textbook, her lips moving as if saying something softly. Camille rested against the door frame and smiled. "I didn't think you were interested in science," she said. Janice looked up. "I'm just reviewing some earlier learning." Camille angled her head. "Are you going to teach now, as well?" Janice smiled. "Not precisely." It began modestly. There were whispered comments and laughter when Janice walked by. Camille told Olivia, and the two created a playful game from it. "Oh, look," Olivia whispered one morning as Janice wheeled her cart past their lunch table. "Einstein with a mop," Camille chuckled. "Probably writing her thesis on floor wax." They laughed a little too loudly. Other students overheard. Some laughed with them. Others avoided eye contact. No one intervened. Janice kept her head down. It was her usual practice. The students overlooked the way her eyes paused on the school crest etched into the wall, her gaze thoughtful rather than resentful. They failed to observe her tendency to listen more than to speak, or her habit of keeping a notebook in the side pocket of her cart, partially filled with notes. One person showed her kindness. Mr. Del Toro, a literature teacher from Fresno who had a fondness for those often overlooked. On one occasion, he observed Janice carefully aligning the copies of To Kill a Mockingbird on a cart just outside his classroom. "You know," he remarked, "most people simply stack them and proceed." Janice offered a slight shrug. "That book warrants more than crooked edges," she said. He chuckled. "I often say that," he stated, then paused. "Have you read it?" Janice responded to his question. "Twice. Initially in high school, and subsequently when I was mature enough to grasp its true significance." He never requested anything further, but from that point forward he would leave a book for her on the bench outside the staff room every other Friday. No message, no inquiries. Nevertheless, the girls persisted. One afternoon, Olivia waited until Janice passed by, then whispered, "I bet she sleeps in the janitor's closet. Probably dreams in Clorox." It wasn't simply impolite, it was unkind. But Janice continued walking, and that disturbed Olivia more than anything. She anticipated embarrassment or anger, or at the very least a reaction. Janice's silence, however, felt inescapable. This made her a figure to be reckoned with. The lights at Northwood High typically dimmed around 8 p.m. Most evenings, though a few always remained lit, sufficient to create long shadows across the marble corridors. It was during these hours that Janice seemed to transform. As the classrooms fell silent and the usual teenage bustle subsided, she would move her cart into the supply closet, change into a clean shirt, and bring her notebook to room 114. Room 114 was no longer designated for a specific class. It had a flickering light and one desk leg shorter than the others. Most teachers steered clear of it. However, Janice had adopted it. The door did not lock, and that was acceptable. She didn't require privacy. She simply needed space. She would retrieve her laptop, a 6-year-old Dell lacking the N key, and sign into her coursework. She was 6 credits shy of finishing a degree in educational leadership through an accelerated adult program offered by the same university that operated Larchmont Hills Academy. A small, understated provision located within the staff handbook provided full scholarships to employees who worked a minimum of 30 hours a week. Most staff members overlooked it. Janice had not. It wasn't about ambition at this point. The focus was on completing a project that had been halted years prior. This was a time when she possessed a child, a husband, and a secure job in Maryland, only to lose all three within 18 months. Life has a way of deflating you before you're aware you've been holding your breath. She never expressed her struggles to anyone. It wasn't a behavior she'd been taught. Occasionally, late at night, she would receive a message from her sister in Detroit. You sleeping or still playing superhero? Janice would respond with a photo of her textbook and a brief message. Chapter 6 is proving difficult. Her sister would then send a laughing emoji, followed by, "You're still the smartest person I know. Don't let those stuck-up girls get to you." She never shared with her sister the full extent of the difficulties. She omitted the incident where Camille accidentally knocked over the bucket of dirty water and seemed to find amusement as Janice knelt to clean it. There was also the incident when Olivia confided in a group of parents during a school tour, suggesting the institution favored hiring individuals with charitable backgrounds. Yet, Janice persisted. She consistently arrived 5 minutes early. Her cart was always spotless, her uniform immaculate. She possessed patience but lacked innocence. Her understanding of the school's customs surpassed that of the students. Beneath the refined wooden interiors and carefully selected diversity pamphlets, there existed a decay. Not everyone, naturally, but sufficiently pervasive to permeate the atmosphere. Janice had no intention of rectifying it. Her task was simple: observe, listen, and document. Unbeknownst to the students, and even the staff, Janice had been selected for a role extending beyond cleaning floors. 2 years prior, following an internal report alleging the Academy's neglect of racial and economic discrimination, the Board of Trustees approved a discreet strategy. They decided to place someone within the school, silently. Someone who wouldn't attract attention. Someone who could witness everything. While working part-time at a community college in Oakland, Janice received a job offer. The position came with no title or special privileges, simply an ID badge, a mop, and a defined purpose. That purpose was to observe, to take notes, and to document the patterns of behavior that were not able to be captured in policy memos or camera footage. The work was not glamorous. However, it was significant. And late at night, with her coursework open in one window and her field notes in another, Janice recorded everything. It wasn't only the cruelty, but the indifference, the smiles that vanished the moment someone turned away. She also wrote about the good teachers, the limited number of students who met her gaze. She recalled how Mr. Del Toro left that copy of Beloved with a sticky note that said, "For someone who understands silence." Still, each shift drained her, not from the labor itself, but from a necessity of feigning. She bore their ignorance as a second uniform, and with each passing day, it became increasingly burdensome. A change was on the horizon, though not as they anticipated. By early spring, the students at Larchmont Hills Academy were already largely disengaged. Señoritas had arrived gradually, like a dense fog, subtle, pervasive, and self-satisfied. Olivia and Camille frequently spent their days in the senior lounge, examining college acceptance emails and making critical remarks about those they perceived as inferior. However, subtle comments were no longer sufficient. The initial excitement had faded. They desired a significant reaction. On a Monday morning, Camille entered the admin office and pretended to be worried. "I think the janitor's been stealing test copies," she whispered to the front desk clerk, making her voice sound very low. "I saw her in a classroom late at night, alone." Ms. Robbins looked surprised. "Janice, are you certain?" Camille adopted her most innocent expression. "I don't want to cause problems for anyone, but this school is supposed to be secure, isn't it?" It was a carefully planned action. If anything resulted from it, so much the better. A sense of unease lingered. That afternoon, Janice was summoned to the operations office. The interaction was presented as a standard procedure with no direct accusations. She remained composed as the facility's manager reviewed his notes, visibly ill at ease. "We simply wanted to inquire if you've been present in unoccupied classrooms during your shift," he stated. "I clean all classrooms assigned to me." Janice responded directly. "Yes, but do you remain longer? For any purpose?" He maintained eye contact. "I complete my assigned tasks. Occasionally, I require a brief respite, as do most people." He acknowledged this with a nod and made a note. "Very well, that concludes the discussion." Janice rose. "Should any questions arise regarding my work, I would welcome a straightforward discussion." The gentleman's cheeks flushed slightly. "There are no concerns. Simply, you understand procedure." It was a flimsy fabrication, and both were aware of it. Outside the office, Janice located Camille resting against the wall, feigning interest in her phone. The smile offered was not amicable. "Everything satisfactory, Miss Albury?" Her tone was saccharine. Janice remained unmoved. It was more effective than one might expect. Camille's face faltered briefly, then quickly returned to its characteristic sneer. However, this was no longer a trivial matter. Camille and Olivia had matured observing individuals evade consequences. This fostered their confidence and impulsiveness. 2 days elapsed before Olivia planned a further incident. She let a silver necklace fall near the janitor's closet and then dramatically announced its disappearance from her locker during lunch. A small crowd assembled. She raised her wrist in a theatrical gesture. "I'm certain I had it in there earlier today," she declared. "I suppose it could be lost permanently," Camille observed. Their friends chuckled, some visibly anxious. "Perhaps check the mop bucket," they joked. However, when one of the admin staff overheard the remark and volunteered to investigate, Olivia quickly recanted. "No, I'm sure I simply misplaced it. It's nothing significant," she said. The immediate concern subsided, but the awkwardness remained. That evening, Mr. Del Toro walked past Janice in the hallway. He stopped. "You're doing okay," he said. Janice looked up from her card. "You've been here long enough to know the games these kids play," he sighed. "Too long sometimes." There was a pause. "Is there anything I can do?" She thought for a moment. "Keep doing what you're doing. That's rare enough." What neither of them knew, what no one knew, was that Janice had already sent her first internal report to the board. Documented dates, quotes, and behavior patterns were observed. Names redacted for now, but she wasn't the only one being monitored anymore. An independent firm had initiated discrete audits. These audits included interviews and surveys presented as student engagement questionnaires. Camille and Olivia believed they had complete control over the school, but attention was shifting. Rumors began to change their focus. Despite this, the girls continued their actions. Cruelty had developed into a pattern, and patterns are difficult to change when they have never faced repercussions. Then, one Friday, Janice heard something that stopped her. In the lounge, behind a cracked door, Camille was speaking to a boy from the tennis team. "You know that janitor, Janice?" she said. "My mom says people like her are just here to make the place look diverse." She referred to it as optics. The boy laughed. Olivia added, "My dad said the school's bleeding money giving those scholarship perks to staff. It's basically charity," Camille scoffed. Unable to repair the situation with books, Janice stood quietly, 1 foot still in the hallway, one hand gripping the edge of her cart. She said nothing, but something within her shifted. She had been patient long enough, but now she had everything she needed, and it was almost time to show them. Before she was sweeping floors under fluorescent lights, Janice Albury had been someone else entirely. 12 years prior, she held the position of Director of Curriculum Development for a public school district in Maryland, known then as Janice Simmons. Her responsibilities included managing a corner office, overseeing 3 staff members, and proudly displaying a plaque from the state superintendent. She was married and a mother. Life at that time possessed a sense of order and comfort. However, that changed with a tragic event. Her husband's car was struck by a delivery truck on I-83 during a snowstorm. He perished in the accident. Her daughter, Kira, who was 6 years old at the time, survived, though with significant injuries. After 2 months spent in a hospital bed, Janice faced a year of surgeries and rehabilitation. While insurance covered a significant portion of the expenses, some costs remained. Janice drew upon her savings, her retirement funds, and ultimately sold their home. Following this, Kira developed pneumonia, which tragically led to her passing. Janice resigned from her job 2 weeks following the funeral. The sight of a school brought back the image of Kira's empty chair, and the sound of children's laughter in the hallways served as a painful reminder of her loss. She moved around, taking temporary work, staying with friends, then in rented rooms, ultimately settling into a small studio apartment in Antioch, California. Despite these changes, she consistently read and continued learning. This pursuit led her to discover a program, a little-known educational equity initiative offered through a university partnership, representing a fresh opportunity. When asked if she would agree to work undercover to examine behavioral differences between students from privileged backgrounds and faculty perspectives, she readily accepted. She acted not out of financial need, but because the system had let down too many individuals resembling her. She refused to accept this inaction. Applying for the janitorial position using her maiden name, she successfully completed the background checks, keeping her degree and credentials secured in a folder at home. Initially, her goal was simply to observe and listen, to remain unnoticed. She had no plan to participate. The incidents she witnessed were disheartening. A senior teacher deriding a student with a speech impediment under the assumption of privacy. Discussions about a girl's financial aid occurred at a staff meeting, presented as a personal failing. Then there were Camille and Olivia, whose parents' substantial donations had secured the gymnasium's naming rights in honor of a hedge fund. Their self-assurance stemmed not from conceit, but from a sense of privilege. Janice felt disheartened by what she observed. Eleanor Larchmont, the school's founder, had originally conceived of the academy as a place for future leaders from all backgrounds. However, that original vision had diminished over time, obscured by financial influence, promotional efforts, and preferential admissions practices. Consequently, Janice began her work. Her notebook rapidly filled with detailed observations, specific dates, recurring linguistic patterns, staff reactions. She consistently attended faculty meetings when possible, choosing to sit in the rear of the room. She posed inquiries that prompted discomfort among those present. She took on committee assignments that others avoided. Steadily and carefully, she became the source of information the board required. And during evenings, as the halls became vacant, she studied. She wasn't simply observing, she was revitalizing herself. Each finished module advanced her progress toward that second degree. Each submitted essay felt like rediscovering a part of the woman she once was. During one evening spent reviewing a case study about institutional gatekeeping, a particular sentence caught her attention. It stated that genuine authority doesn't proclaim itself, it waits to be recognized. She emphasized this line with underlines. Graduation was approaching rapidly, just 3 weeks away. She had finished the program without drawing much attention. Her grade point average ranked her among the highest in her group. The board had previously approved her to address the audience. Camille and Olivia continued to walk through the halls with an air of confidence, unaware of what was about to unfold. The faculty, too, were on the verge of a realization that learning extends beyond the classroom. Janice had observed them for 2 years. Now, she was poised to step forward, taking the central position, and they would be completely surprised. That morning, the sky above Antioch was clear, excessively bright considering the anxiety some individuals brought into the Larchmont Hills Academy Auditorium. Families occupied the seats, proud parents filled with anticipation and clutching phones, surrounded by flowers, ties, and costly perfume. The scene appeared flawless. Camille Strathmore wore a champagne-colored stole that her mother had flown in from France. Olivia Cranston had her hair professionally styled before dawn, her makeup applied to endure the entire day. They smiled for photographs, laughed with joy, and stood with the grace of young women who'd been raised to believe the world was within their reach. Behind the scenes, Janice remained still in her black robe. There were no embellishments, no unnecessary details. She declined the academic award the committee presented, stating she had no need for it. What she desired was a single moment, just one, and that moment had arrived. The dean, Dr. Leonard, approached her, holding a program. "Ready, Ms. Albury?" She met his gaze. She had been prepared. He offered a restrained smile and returned toward the podium. Camille and Olivia did not even look at her as they passed by in their elegant gowns. It was understandable. She was unnoticed once more, simply an element of the surroundings. The ceremony commenced as it always did. Names were announced, families applauded, and speeches were delivered. The school's jazz trio performed something gentle and unremarkable. Subsequently, Dr. Leonard approached the microphone. As we approach the end of this year's commencement, we have a particularly noteworthy announcement, one that, intentionally, has remained private until this moment. Students adjusted in their seats. Parents moved closer. Even faculty appeared puzzled. This year, the Board of Trustees authorized a confidential academic pilot program meant to enable working staff at our institution to pursue higher education with complete anonymity. The program demands both academic excellence and professional integrity of the highest order. Camille glanced at Olivia. Olivia showed a frown. Murmurs began behind them. Dr. Leonard proceeded. "We are pleased to announce that the highest academic honor this year goes not to a student you might have learned alongside, but to someone many of you overlooked." He paused, then stated distinctly, "Please welcome Janice Albury, this year's valedictorian." A stillness hung in the air. Then, with a suddenness like a glass shattering in a quiet room, the news arrived. People turned their heads, their mouths agape. Camille remained motionless, her expression rigid. Olivia blinked, then attempted a laugh, only to find herself laughing alone. Janice proceeded deliberately to the stage. Her movements were controlled, her posture upright. She avoided looking at the assembled group until she reached the podium. Then, she surveyed the audience slowly, her gaze finally fixing on Camille and Olivia. Following this, she began to speak. I arrived at this school with a mop in one hand and a question lingering in my thoughts. Her voice resonated, strong and clear, without any doubt. I found myself questioning the true nature of this institution. Beyond the official statistics, the promotional materials, and the presentations, I wanted to determine if respect was readily available here, or if it was something that needed to be gained only by those who possessed the appropriate attire, footwear, and family names. The auditorium was completely silent. I dedicated countless evenings tidying up after those who spoke negatively about me. And when they observed me reading a book or attending a classroom session after hours, they mocked. She paused. However, my focus extended beyond mere reading. I was observing, studying, not solely to earn a degree, but to uncover solutions. She turned slightly toward the faculty, and now I possessed them. Students surveyed the room, adjusting in their places. Olivia's expression remained inscrutable. Camille clutched her program firmly, her knuckles white. Janice lifted her chin. I stand here today, not just as your valedictorian, but as a reflection of the very things that Elmwood High claims to stand for: growth, opportunity, and truth. But she hadn't revealed everything yet, and what she said next would change the room forever. You could hear a cough from 3 rows back. A chair creaked. A phone buzzed quietly against someone's hip, but no one moved to check it. A hush fell over the room as people leaned in, anticipating Janice's next words. She proceeded deliberately, taking a drink of water, briefly reviewing her notes, and neatly folding them. Then, she raised her gaze. "I'm sure some of you are wondering how I came to be here," she began, gesturing to her robe and the podium. A few members of the front row, largely faculty, nodded in agreement, seemingly unaware they had done so. "My presence here wasn't solely for the purpose of earning a degree," she added. 2 years ago, the university board contacted me following concerns raised, discreetly, privately, regarding the increasing atmosphere of class division and privilege within Ashworth Academy. They requested I consider a position, but not as a faculty member, not as a consultant, as a janitor. At this, the room shifted. Janice allowed the silence to linger. My purpose was to observe. Away from executive suites and scheduled gatherings, I observed. In the corridors, the athletic facilities, the classrooms buzzing with after-hours conversations where students felt safe to speak openly, believing they were unobserved. I was attentive. A woman among the parents visibly expressed discomfort. Over a period, I noted seemingly minor incidents. Yet, these minor incidents accumulated. I saw how some students treated those they perceived as outsiders. I noticed how the lack of intervention from adults permitted that behavior to escalate, and how some of you, who should have been more informed, chose to ignore it. She looked toward the staff. Some of you were aware, and you remained silent. The words struck with force. Camille's mouth felt parched. Olivia had ceased breathing through her nose. She remained motionless, as if blinking would make her vanish. The most troubling aspect, Janice continued, is that the behavior was not concealed. It was open, commonplace, accepted, and frequently it was encouraged, amid smiles, with focus, and with widespread recognition. She paused, taking a moment. I'm not here to criticize you. I'm here to offer a reminder. Her tone became gentler. You cannot determine someone's worth based on their clothing or their profession. You cannot assess dignity through financial status or lineage. She lowered her gaze briefly, then raised her head with renewed focus. I once had a daughter. Her name was Kira. She would have been your age now. A stillness fell over the audience, similar to a chilling breeze. She passed away before she had the opportunity to wear a cap and gown. I'm not sharing this to elicit sympathy. I am sharing it because I see her in all of you. I see who she could have become. And I wonder, if she had been here, would she have been ridiculed as well? No one dared respond. Perhaps not. However, what I know for certain is that if you depart here today believing the world will defer to your name, you have already failed. She paused again. Education is not merely about books and tests. Remember how you handle the individual you believe you'll never require assistance from, because life possesses a peculiar tendency to shift unexpectedly. Subsequently, the final setback occurred. I have delivered my conclusive report to the board. My assessment has led to a restructuring of the scholarship program, emphasizing integrity and contribution rather than legacy. A comprehensive audit of disciplinary cases spanning the last 5 years will be conducted, and students involved in harassment, encompassing verbal and social forms, will be subject to formal reviews. A subtle vibration resonated from the rear. Several parents murmured amongst themselves, their voices becoming more audible. Janice moved back a little. This isn't retribution, it's accountability. She fixed her attention on Camille, then Olivia, who had lowered her gaze to the floor. And accountability is not swayed by the wealth of your father. However, that wasn't the finality of the matter, as repercussions would follow even after the applause subsided. The ceremony concluded with noticeably diminished enthusiasm compared to its start. Some students applauded, while others seemed unsure how to react. A small number of families, appearing uneasy, left the room before the conclusion. However, Janice maintained her composure, smiling as she returned to her place. It wasn't the back row where she previously observed, but rather near the front, alongside board members and professors who now regarded her with a noticeable change, respect. Camille did not speak as she departed the auditorium. Her father was already waiting close to the car, his expression stern, avoiding her gaze. Olivia's mother, arms crossed, stood by the valley in stunned silence. There were no congratulations, no flowers, just silence. Inside, a small crowd had gathered around Janice. Teachers who had previously offered only a polite greeting were now shaking her hand. Mr. Del Toro remained at a respectful distance, waiting for an opportune moment. You didn't simply speak, he stated when they eventually talked. You transformed the entire atmosphere. Janice looked at him and smiled softly. The air had needed changing. Upon the lawn, several of the younger students expressed their awe. A girl wearing a red dress confided to her friend, "I wasn't aware she attended school," to which her friend responded, I didn't know she could articulate herself so eloquently. A sense of belated recognition began to spread, an acknowledgement of what had been missed, what had been consciously disregarded. That evening, Janice was in her apartment, with a plastic container of leftover chicken salad and the commencement program placed on the table next to her. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the board's director. The subject line read, "Thank you." The message stated, "Your final report is being reviewed. Policy meetings begin next week. Your courage will shape the future of this school." She set the phone down and exhaled. It wasn't relief, it wasn't pride, but a quiet, grounded sense of purpose. The kind that didn't require applause or accolades. Meanwhile, news about the graduation speech spread quickly. A video shared online by a teacher's assistant was already spreading among parents and alumni. The title was straightforward: Janitor or Genius, Larchmont's Graduation Shocker. Regarding Camille and Olivia, Camille was required to attend a disciplinary review. Her parents were obligated to participate. A scheduled summer internship at her father's firm was discreetly canceled. It was rumored that she would be asked to fulfill community service hours before receiving her diploma. Olivia's parents initially resisted, indicating they would pursue legal action and requesting apologies. However, upon the school sharing portions of Janice's records, containing witness statements and documented incidents, they ceased their objections. Olivia was permitted to graduate, although her honors were removed. Both girls remained silent regarding the matter, but those familiar with them observed a change. The teasing ended, and the hushed conversations also stopped. The following fall, Janice received a new opportunity, the role of Director of Equity and Inclusion Initiatives for the school district. She agreed to take the position. On her final day, as she walked the halls with her cart, she placed a sticky note on the supply closet door. It read, "Respect isn't owed, it's revealed." With clean floors, clear eyes, J.A., and a final goodbye, she left the mop behind. Leaving Larchmont Hills, she wore a navy blazer and carried a satchel, not to demonstrate professional advancement, but because she felt no further need for discretion. 1 week later, she returned, not in a work uniform, but as a guest speaker for the new staff orientation. Standing at the podium again, she addressed the teachers, new hires, and assistants. "Your job title doesn't determine your influence," she stated. "How you treat people when no one's looking does." Her voice resonated to the back of the room, and this time, everyone was attentive because they finally grasped the meaning. Respect isn't about volume, it's about the impact you make. If this story resonated with you, if it prompted you to reconsider how we treat people, we believe it's sufficient. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, and discuss it. The world would benefit from more individuals with qualities similar to Janice's, and it's valuable to remember that the most reserved person present could impart the most significant lessons. During a flight, a black pastor was asked to remove his cross. Rather than reacting with anger, he rose and shared a message that captivated everyone. It was a pleasant Friday morning in late April when Pastor Elijah Rowe entered Raleigh-Durham International Airport through the sliding glass doors, pulling a small black carry-on behind him. He wasn't hurried, never was. At 58 years old, Elijah possessed the composed demeanor of someone who understood that serenity wasn't achieved through haste. His flight to Albuquerque was planned with a connection in Kansas City, and Flight 287 would transport him through the initial segment. He was wearing a light cream linen shirt, dark slacks, and warm brown shoes that had been present at numerous potluck dinners and hospital rooms beyond measure. However, what distinguished him wasn't his attire. It was the small wooden cross resting softly against his chest. It wasn't ostentatious or large. No gold, no diamonds, simply a piece of carved wood. The edges softened by years of use. His grandmother had given it to him when he was 18, shortly before her passing. "Wear it when the world forgets who you are," she told him. He hadn't taken off since. At gate C21, Elijah located a quiet corner seat and retrieved a notepad. He didn't prepare his sermons on a laptop. He favored paper, appreciating the sound of pen against page. This week's message concerned forgiveness, once more. He quietly chuckled to himself. It feels as though I'm meant to continue sharing what I'm still discovering, he murmured, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The boarding call came promptly. He rose, offered a pleasant good morning to the gate agent, and proceeded down the jet bridge. He gave a brief acknowledgement to the flight attendant stationed by the door. A tall woman with a formal demeanor and a precise tone. Seat 22, Elijah spoke quietly to himself as he walked down the aisle. A young man was already settled in a 22B, wearing headphones and a hoodie. Elijah offered a polite smile and took a seat by the window. The boy didn't acknowledge him. That was acceptable. Elijah didn't require conversation to feel at ease. He positioned the cross against his shirt and continued writing in his notebook. After 15 minutes, the cabin door closed. The aircraft began to pull away from the gate. The standard announcements were made, followed by the familiar, somewhat jarring sound as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah murmured a brief prayer as the plane ascended into the sky. He was halfway through his outline on Luke 6 when a voice broke his concentration. "Sir," a woman's voice said from the aisle. "Sir, excuse me." Elijah looked up to see the same tall flight attendant from earlier, standing beside him. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes gentle. She did not smile. "Could you please tuck your necklace into your shirt?" Elijah blinked. "My cross." She nodded. "We've received some complaints." He looked around, surprised. "From whom?" She replied quickly, "I can't disclose that. We simply request that passengers be considerate of items that may cause discomfort to others." He studied her face for a moment. There was no warmth in it, no opportunity for discussion. "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, "but this necklace isn't a display. It's my faith. It was my grandmother's." "Sir, I'm not attempting to argue with you," she said, her voice tightening. "I'm requesting that you please comply with a straightforward request so we can avoid any additional issues." "Is this an airline policy?" Her lips formed a thin line. "I need your cooperation," she stated. The young man in 22B adjusted his hoodie and looked at Elijah, then averted his gaze. Elijah kept his hands still on his notebook. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his tone even quieter this time. "But I won't be hiding it." The flight attendant released a breath through her nose, appearing visibly annoyed. "I'll be back," she said, and then turned and left. Elijah leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Below them, the clouds spread out, a vast expanse of brilliant white. He touched the cross carefully, his thumb tracing the worn rim. This feeling wasn't unfamiliar, not precisely. Yet it felt altered, as if something had changed, though he couldn't yet identify what. The flight continued, and so did their discussion. The drink cart was 2 rows behind when she returned, without a smile, without warmth. She maintained the same rigid posture and that precise, formal tone, making each word feel like a protocol rather than an exchange. "Sir," she repeated, standing before Elijah's row, her arms now crossed. "I must ask you once more to secure the necklace." A woman 2 rows above expressed that she finds it objectionable. Elijah didn't reply immediately. He observed her intently. Her name tag indicated C. Densmore. Her uniform was immaculate, with not a single thread amiss. She repeatedly looked at the other passengers, seemingly searching for support or an observer. He focused his gaze forward. In row 20, a woman wearing a blue blazer and large sunglasses remained fixedly ahead. She didn't look back, didn't move restlessly, simply waited. "I understand what you're saying," Elijah responded steadily. "But I am innocent. I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm simply sitting here quietly. Why is this necklace causing a problem?" Claire Densmore's jaw tightened. "This isn't concerning your silence. It's important to be thoughtful. If someone finds something you're wearing upsetting, it's fair to ask you to modify it," Elijah stated calmly. "If someone is offended by my faith, I don't believe that gives them the right to suppress it." At that point, her tone changed. A hint of her composure faded. "You're being uncooperative," she said, her voice rising. "I am asking you respectfully, but you are being confrontational," and several heads turned. A woman situated 2 rows back extended into the aisle, observing. A man seated across from Elijah shifted his position to gain a clearer view. Elijah's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the young man in 22B. The kid had retrieved his phone, subtly, not overtly. Screen angled upwards, thumb poised above the record button. "I'm not trying to provoke anyone," Elijah said, speaking deliberately. "But I won't conceal my cross. I won't take it away to accommodate another person's ease. I apologize." Claire expressed her disapproval. "Then we may have to escalate this," she stated firmly. "You're refusing to follow a directive from a flight crew member. That's a federal offense," someone exclaimed. "Are you serious?" Another voice inquired from a few rows back. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard leaned into the aisle. "He's literally just sitting there," he observed. Claire disregarded him. "I'm going to inform the captain," she declared, maintaining eye contact with Elijah. "We'll handle this when we land." "Of course," Elijah responded. She turned and walked away again, this time with a quicker pace, speaking quietly to another flight attendant as she moved past the drink cart. The ensuing silence felt heavy. Elijah remained still in his seat, his pen still held between his fingers. The pages of his sermon notes shifted gently in the airflow from the overhead vent. Then a quiet voice emerged. "Sir," the boy beside him whispered, almost lost in the plane's hum. "I'm recording, just so you know, in case they attempt anything." Elijah slowly turned his head and offered the boy a thankful nod. "Thank you," he said softly. "I saw everything," the boy added. "She's way out of line." Elijah smiled slightly. "Sometimes it's not about the cross. It's about the person wearing it." The boy remained silent, but glanced down at his phone, which was still recording. 3 rows back, an older black woman whispered something to the person beside her. Her gaze met Elijah's for a brief moment. She offered him a subtle nod, as if acknowledging his presence and understanding his situation. That gesture carried weight. The intercom buzzed, and another attendant, not Claire, delivered a brief announcement regarding anticipated light turbulence. Standard procedure. However, the atmosphere on the plane had changed noticeably. Passengers were no longer solely focused on sleeping or entertainment. They were alert and observant. It wasn't the sort of attention Elijah desired, but his perspective had become secondary. Before the plane could land, an unexpected event occurred, one that even Elijah hadn't anticipated. By the time the plane stabilized after the turbulence warning, Claire Dinsmore returned to the aisle, but she was accompanied by another flight attendant. He was a younger man with dark hair and visibly nervous eyes. His name tag identified him as Jonas Worth, and unlike Claire, he lacked confidence in his demeanor. His steps were hesitant, appearing almost apologetic. "Mr. Rowe," Claire began, ensuring her voice carried to a significant portion of the cabin. "I've spoken with the captain. If you persist in disregarding crew instructions, we might need to take additional measures upon arrival." Elijah remained unperturbed. "I would still appreciate knowing which policy I'm in violation of." "You're becoming argumentative once more," Claire retorted. Jonas moved closer, observing the interaction. "Perhaps we could simply—" Claire interrupted him. "Jonas, I'm managing this." And then it reappeared, that palpable tension, that familiar tone. Elijah stayed seated, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Behind them, row 19 began to move. "I don't see why he should be made to conceal his cross," a woman with curly red hair and a noticeable Wisconsin accent stated. "I wear a Star of David necklace on every flight. I've never been addressed about it." Claire turned quickly. "Ma'am, I am requesting you refrain from intervening." The woman responded, "I'm not interfering. I'm simply observing that this feels like he's being unfairly targeted." At that moment, something changed noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, but responding. A gentleman in seat 18D craned his neck. "Is this truly how this airline handles situations?" he inquired. "I'm recording as well, and I understand how swiftly videos spread online." Claire appeared taken aback. She started to speak, then hesitated and closed her mouth. "Elijah," Jonas said quietly, intervening and lowering his tone. "Sir, I apologize truly. You've been entirely respectful. I believe we should reduce the tension. Let's allow this to pass." Claire's cheeks reddened. She looked at Jonas as if he had committed a betrayal. Then, with a visible effort to control herself, she hissed, "He's disregarding a direct order. To do what?" Elijah asked, maintaining his composure. "To conceal a portion of myself that I've carried for 40 years? That doesn't seem correct to me, ma'am." Claire's jaw tightened again. "I am finished." She turned and walked forcefully toward the front of the plane, her shoulders stiff with anger. Jonas remained behind, feeling unsure. "I apologize for all of this," he said softly to Elijah. "I believe she misinterpreted the circumstances," she responded. "I think she understood perfectly," Elijah said calmly. "She simply didn't approve of what she observed." Jonas lowered his gaze, then looked away. The cabin stabilized, but a feeling of unease lingered. Passengers murmured along the aisle, with some visibly shaking their heads. A cough broke the silence. The boy in 22B continued filming. Then Elijah took an unexpected action. He rose to his feet. Without raising his voice or gesturing, he stood in the confined area near his seat and angled himself so those in the surrounding rows could hear. "I don't often speak in public spaces such as this," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "But I believe it's important to say something." One by one, people turned to look at him. "I'm a pastor," he continued. "I serve a small church in Durham. This cross," he raised it carefully between his fingers, "was a gift from my grandmother. She experienced events that many of us only read about. She advised me to wear this when the world attempted to define me." A brief silence followed. "I have not removed it since her funeral. My reason isn't that I believe it improves me, but that it serves as a reminder to remain compassionate. Even when I am not shown kindness." A person in 24C covered their mouth. Another individual in 20F audibly sniffled. "I understand not everyone shares my beliefs. I acknowledge and respect that, but I am certain I have acted appropriately. I remained still, adhered to every guideline, and attempted to be courteous, even when I felt diminished." He addressed Jonas directly. "I do not require being asked to leave this flight. I pose no danger. I am merely a man traveling home to deliver a sermon on forgiveness on Sunday." The atmosphere on the plane was subdued, yet sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could, and the quietness wasn't going to last much longer. Claire had not reappeared since she departed. The whereabouts of Eleanor remained uncertain, whether she was in the galley, visibly upset, or once again speaking with the captain. It was unclear. However, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't just one person standing. Instead, a sense of reality had permeated the space, manifesting in every hushed exchange and fleeting look shared among those seated within 30 rows. Elijah quietly resumed his seat, as if finishing a chapter in a novel. He sought no accolades and craved no validation. He simply released a breath. The young man next to him ceased recording, though he kept his phone in hand. "You sure you're pastor?" he inquired softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Elijah laughed. "Some Sundays I question it myself," he admitted. The young man chuckled and glanced at his phone screen. "That's already being shared. People need to hear things like that." A few minutes elapsed. Following that, the woman in the blue blazer, the one Claire had mentioned complained about, gradually turned from 2 rows forward. Her sunglasses were now removed. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a tense expression, yet there was a gentleness about her. I remained silent. She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. Elijah lifted his eyebrows. "Mom, I never said I was upset. I didn't mention your necklace." The atmosphere became quiet once more. Several passengers who had been listening seemed interested. "She simply inquired if I was all right," the woman added, and I replied that I hadn't observed anything. "Are you suggesting Claire wasn't truthful?" Someone murmured behind Elijah. The woman in the blazer remained silent. She pivoted, appearing somewhat less confident. Jonas emerged from the front of the plane. His shirt now had a slight wrinkle, as if he's been twisting his hands. He stopped near Elijah's row and bent down a little, speaking quietly. "The captain is aware," he said. "And just so you know, you're not in any trouble. We're not removing you. There's no written reprimand." "Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Jonas expressed regret that things hadn't unfolded differently, noting that occasionally individuals carry emotional burdens that extend beyond physical luggage. Elijah offered a subtle smile in agreement, commenting that this phenomenon is evident in various settings, not just airplanes. Jonas paused, then continued, "I'm not sure if this is inappropriate, but would you be comfortable with me attending your church sometime? I used to go when I was younger, but it's been a long time." Elijah's smile widened. "Certainly. Please do. I'll be sure to reserve a place for you." Jonas gently touched the armrest before departing. As he moved back up the aisle, a woman seated opposite Elijah bent forward. "Pastor," she murmured, "thank you." He observed her. She appeared older, possibly in her 70s. A long green scarf adorned her, and her hands rested in her lap, as if guarding something delicate. "You didn't need to speak," she said, "but you did." "Sometimes silence can feel heavier than a voice," Elijah replied. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "That is precisely it." The boy beside Elijah nudged him gently. Elijah gazed out the window. "Let's just hope I'm preaching the same on Sunday as I'm living right now," he thought. A woman with curly hair, whom he's seen before, spoke from behind. "I think the Lord already gave you your sermon, Pastor," she said. "You just preached it at 35,000 feet. Laughter rippled through the cabin, soft, sincere, and welcome. Conversations started again, moving beyond quiet murmurs. A sense of energy and relief filled the cabin, as if it had expelled something it had been containing. However, Claire was still missing. But when she ultimately returned, she would not be alone, and she would not anticipate what awaited her. Approximately 40 minutes had passed since Claire's disappearance. It was believed she would remain missing until the landing. Yet, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated once more, she reappeared, accompanied by the captain himself. Captain Raymond Stills was in his mid-40s, gray hair buzzed close, weathered skin from years in cockpits. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear rushed. But there was something in his face, an alert stillness, like someone who had seen far worse and didn't want to make a situation worse than it already was. He stopped beside Elijah's row and crouched slightly, just as Jonas had. "Sir," he said in a low, calm voice, "my name's Ray. I understand there's been some tension on board." Elijah met his gaze directly. "Captain," I remained silent. "This cross I'm wearing appeared to cause concern for a flight attendant. She requested that I conceal it. I declined." Ray observed the necklace, then noted Elijah's composed demeanor. "I appreciate your manner," the captain said. "It's more significant than you realize these days." Claire stood rigidly behind him, her arms crossed. Those seated around appeared to be ignoring the situation, yet no one was wearing headphones. All were attentively listening. "I've spoken with my crew," Ray said, "and I've reviewed the footage. Several passengers had documented portions of the interaction, including the young man seated nearby." Elijah briefly looked at the teenager, who offered a subtle nod, still clutching his phone as if it were a barrier. Ray rose and surveyed the adjacent rows. "I want to be clear," he stated, his voice now more pronounced. "This airline has no rule against religious symbols, be it a cross, a hijab, a yarmulke, or another item. Passengers may express their beliefs provided they do so respectfully. Based on observations, Pastor Rowe has been acting in that manner, prompting nods and applause from several people." Quiet, polite, and without drama, Ray addressed Claire. "We're going to have a more in-depth conversation after we land." Claire offered no reply. Her expression remained unreadable, but her jaw was tense. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. Ray leaned toward Elijah. "You're not in trouble. You never were. I apologize on behalf of the crew." "You don't have to," Elijah replied, "but I appreciate it." Ray offered a small smile. "Well, some things are still worth saying." And with that, he returned to the cockpit. Jonas reappeared moments later and quietly offered Elijah a free drink and snack box. "Captain's orders," he said sheepishly. "You deserve at least that," Elijah chuckled. "I'll take the almonds." As the plane began its descent into Kansas City, a different feeling settled over the cabin. People were chatting again, not nervously but openly. Two men who hadn't spoken the whole flight were now exchanging church stories. A young woman pulled out her Bible and started highlighting verses. A toddler across the aisle waved at Elijah, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Elijah simply sat back and completed his sermon notes. He wrote, "Forgiveness, but not silence." The older woman in green across the aisle retrieved a pen and wrote something on a napkin, then passed it to Elijah. He unfolded it and read, "You reminded us how to carry grace." "Thank you." He folded the napkin and placed it into his notebook. The plane began its final descent, but there was a quiet sense of closure. It felt as though something had broken and then repaired itself, if only a little. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the event wasn't concluded. The world beyond that plane had already taken notice. Flight 287 landed in Kansas City just after 4:20 p.m. The tires made a soft thumping sound as they touched the runway. The standard chime occurred. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts. The overhead compartments released with a click. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the movement, as if no one wished to be the first to disrupt the significance of what had transpired in the air. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a flight attendant, someone other than Claire, announced over the intercom. Her voice sounded nervous, almost shaky. She expressed gratitude for everyone flying with them that day. For those continuing their journey to Albuquerque, boarding would resume shortly after a brief pause. Elijah waited patiently. He consistently prioritized allowing others to disembark first. He remained seated with his hands resting on his notebook, his cross still noticeable as the aisle emptied. When he eventually stood to collect his bag, Jonas greeted him at the plane's front. "Sir," he stated, "there are 2 airport officers just outside the jet bridge. They're not here for you. They simply want to speak briefly with the crew and take a statement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Was someone pressing charges? "No," they replied, but once the footage started spreading, someone tagged airport security, then a few others. "I suppose people are watching." Elijah stepped off the plane and into the fluorescent-lit walkway. 2 officers stood to the side, but neither approached him. They spoke softly with a woman holding a clipboard, presumably a gate supervisor. Jonas acknowledged him with a nod and returned to the aircraft. Inside the terminal, Elijah located a quiet seat near the window. He retrieved his phone for the first time in hours, revealing 30 new messages, missed calls, and a voicemail from his assistant at the church. However, a notification at the top of the screen caught his attention. A video had gone viral. It was the recording from the teen in seat 22B, now shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The caption stated, "Flight attendant attempts to embarrass pastor for wearing a cross." See his response. It had over 800,000 views and was increasing. Elijah watched only a few seconds. The video showed him seated calmly, Claire standing over him. Her voice was sharp, his reply quiet and steady. Then it shifted to his impromptu speech, the cross visible between his fingers. He turned the phone face down. He disliked attention, always had. He wasn't a person seeking headlines or clicks. A deeper feeling resonated within him. It wasn't pride, nor was it fear. It was the weight of being observed. A few minutes passed, and the teenager from 22B approached him. "Hey," the boy said, slightly winded. "I'm getting off here. My layover is in KC. I just wanted to say thanks again for not reacting negatively." Elijah smiled. "You accomplished more than I did." "You spoke the truth," the kid laughed. "No, man, you experienced it. I simply captured it on video." He extended his hand. "I'm Tyrell, by the way." "Elijah," they responded, shaking hands. The boy departed, his phone still in his hand, now with a more upright posture. Elijah reclined and rubbed his eyes. The day's burden began to weigh heavily on him. Immediately, his phone vibrated, displaying a message from his assistant. The church board viewed the video. They requested he address the matter on Sunday. Discussions about it were widespread. He rested his head against the terminal window. Outside, a plane was ascending. The engines created a powerful roar. The sun had descended just enough to illuminate the wings in gold. This was not what he had envisioned. He had come seeking tranquility and found himself amidst turmoil. Yet, perhaps storms were not always intended to be averted. For sometimes, The most profound teachings begin well before the formal setting and resonate far beyond the conclusion of a journey. Sunday morning arrived sooner than Elijah anticipated. He stood behind the pulpit at Grace Fellowship in Durham, the same location where he delivered sermons almost every week for the preceding 18 years. However, this time, the atmosphere felt altered. The seating was more densely filled. Unfamiliar faces occupied the pews, some from different churches, and others seemingly from nowhere. Phones were already capturing video before he began speaking. He chose not to start with scripture this time. He advanced, set his notes to the side, and surveyed the audience. Most of you viewed the video. He started. Some of you shared it, while others placed calls. Some expressed anger. Some inquired why I didn't shout, why I didn't call her out, why I didn't fight back. He paused, allowing the atmosphere to become still. I've considered that as well. I've been reflecting on it consistently since. There were no microphone issues, no sounds of discomfort, just a quiet stillness. I remained composed on that plane, not from a place of fragility or fear, but because I've experienced enough to understand that the most prominent voice isn't always the most powerful. Occasionally, fortitude lies in remaining still when every instinct urges action. Occasionally, it's about declining with composure rather than anger, heads affirmed throughout the sanctuary. I didn't display that cross to instigate anyone. I wore it because it serves as a reminder of my identity. And when someone asks you to conceal the very essence that formed you, you are presented with two options: suppress your being to ease others, or remain steadfast and allow the resulting unease to reside with another. He glanced across the first row. Terrell was present beside Elijah's assistant. He offered a slight smile. The incident on that flight affected everyone. It highlighted how frequently we are instructed to be less assertive, quieter, and more accommodating. However, the reality is that one's beliefs, personal narrative, and cultural background are not liabilities. They are not something to be regretted, nor are they expendable. He touched the small wooden cross he wore and lifted it with care. My grandmother gifted me this not for its appearance, but for its enduring significance. She told me, "They'll try to take your voice. Don't hand them your silence, too." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Grief, pride, recognition. He took a deep breath. I don't hate the woman from a plane. I'm not angry, but I hope she saw something that day that challenged her. And I hope we all remember, just because the world can't carry your truth doesn't mean you need to hide it. He stepped back. The congregation stood without prompting. It wasn't applause. It wasn't noise. A palpable sense of unity arose, as if a profound understanding transcended mere words. Following the service, Elijah emerged into the fresh spring air. Individuals approached him, extending handshakes, embraces, and cards. Some were visibly moved to tears. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You gave me permission to stop hiding." By that evening, the video had garnered 3.2 million views. Media organizations began contacting him, requesting interviews and soliciting editorials. But Elijah remained focused on his local community. His inbox remained full, yet his hand continued its work, visiting a family in the hospital, organizing food for the shelter, and completing the next week's sermon. The cross never left his neck. And for each story that arrived concerning someone standing up, speaking out, or simply choosing not to shrink, he'd whisper a quiet prayer. Not for praise, but for courage. The kind that doesn't roar, just the kind that remains. Because real change doesn't always begin with a protest or a headline. It begins with one person choosing to remain present. And if this story resonated with you, please don't simply move on, but share it, discuss it. And always remember to remain true to yourself, even when it's simpler to conform. A man struck a 53-year-old woman on public transit, mistakenly believing she was alone and vulnerable. He was unaware that her husband held the position of the most respected officer in town. It had been a challenging day, characterized by delays and setbacks. When Vanessa Kirkland arrived at the Blue Line platform in downtown Sacramento, her heels were causing discomfort, her back ached, and she was 2 missed calls behind schedule on her way to the train. The time was approaching 6:15 p.m. The sun had already begun to descend behind the old courthouse building. She looked at her phone, but did not check the notifications. Not tonight. Vanessa was 53, possessing a sharp mind, a warm voice, and consistently wearing her silver-framed glasses and demonstrating patience. She worked as a lead advocate at a nonprofit legal center, experiencing long days, emotionally draining environments, and paperwork that was constant. Nevertheless, she wouldn't trade it. Assisting individuals, particularly families navigating a system they found perplexing or untrustworthy, felt like a duty, not merely a profession. As the train arrived, she boarded and looked for a place to sit. Limited space was available. She located a partially filled row towards the center and settled in with a soft exhale, placing her tote bag next to her. The atmosphere was largely peaceful. Passengers were absorbed in their phones, listening to music or browsing on screens. A teenager in a school hoodie, chewing gum and watching something with the volume a little too high, sat directly across from her. 2 seats to her left, a couple of nurses still in scrubs spoke softly in Spanish. It was nothing out of the ordinary. The train began to move. Vanessa rested her head and breathed out. She considered dinner, likely just leftovers. Perhaps she would reheat that lentil stew, or possibly just cereal and a long bath. Her thoughts wandered. But then a voice arose. It was loud, rapid, and smug. "Excuse me, I'm going to ask you something." She didn't move at first, just opened her eyes slowly. Across the aisle, a man had gotten on at the last stop. Mid-20s, tall, wiry, and loud, wore a sleeveless hoodie and had headphones around his neck. He was looking straight at her, grinning. Vanessa blinked once, didn't say a word. He leaned a little closer. "I'm serious. You're sitting up here as if you're running for mayor." Wearing a complete church ensemble, I observed her. A nearby teenager chuckled softly. The man visibly straightened, seeming to relish the attention. "You must be going somewhere important, ma'am," he stated. She remained silent. Adjusting her glasses, she maintained a dignified posture and subtly turned her head toward the window. However, he wasn't finished. He began pacing with deliberate, measured steps down the aisle, gesturing at various passengers. "People like her," he declared, "always act as if they are superior. Sit straight, avert your gaze, and remain silent." It seemed as though others judged us harshly. People began to notice. A woman near the front briefly looked back before quickly averting her gaze. A young man behind Vanessa subtly reached for his phone. Vanessa felt no surge of panic. Years of practice had taught her to remain composed during confrontations. She recognized this behavior, a display of confidence fueled by the desire for attention. A man who felt more powerful when others appeared diminished. She spoke calmly. "You should take a seat." Her voice was even, neither raised nor trembling, simply resolute. The man paused. He paused, appearing hesitant. Then, he tilted his head. "Oh, are you giving orders now? Do you have a badge or something?" Vanessa remained unmoved. "No, but you're embarrassing yourself in front of a train full of strangers." His smile briefly wavered. Then he moved closer, too close. However, the atmosphere in the car shifted. People were observing now, more than previously. There was tension, certainly, but also a sense of anticipation, as if everyone was awaiting the next development. Vanessa remained still, her gaze fixed on him, her hands resting in her lap. He smirked. "You got a mouth on you. Let's see if you talk like that when I'm a little closer." But he didn't know who he was addressing, and he was about to discover that the hard way. The train rattled forward, cutting through the city as if oblivious to the escalating tension inside Car 7. The man, later identified as Kyle Dunham, aged 26, with a record full of petty nonsense, stood inches from Vanessa now. A subtle aroma of malt liquor and mint gum emanated from his breath. He lowered himself, observing her with the gaze of a child studying a motionless doll, anticipating her to break eye contact first. She remained steadfast. "You're one of those strong, independent types, huh?" He expectorated. "Always got something smart to say when there's people around to protect you." But you on your own now, sweetheart. Vanessa released a barely perceptible sigh, the kind intended to convey disappointment, not weariness. I'm not on my own, she stated. Kyle surveyed the surroundings with a flourish. Oh, who has you back, then? He called out, raising his voice. Does anyone among you want to come and save Grandma over here? He paused. No, I didn't expect so. The word Grandma stung more than he anticipated, not because of her age, but because of the implication behind it. It suggested she was diminished, that women aged and became invisible, useless, laughable, something to ridicule, not to honor. Nevertheless, she remained composed. You're embarrassing yourself, she stated gently. That's what bullies do when they are afraid. Kyle appeared startled, freezing in place. How do you know my name? He demanded. Vanessa subtly shifted forward, her voice remaining composed. You mentioned it earlier. On the phone, prior to boarding the train. That was a deception. He denied having done so. But her statement unnerved him, prompting him to question what else she might know. You're crazy, he mumbled. Vanessa turned back toward the window, not in a dismissive manner, but as if he were insignificant. This was the catalyst. Kyle's pride couldn't withstand the rejection. The audience had fallen silent. His performance was unsuccessful, and a bitter expression tightened his features. Finish speaking now? He demanded. All that talking, and now you're afraid? Vanessa remained silent, so he gently nudged her shoulder, a clear indication that this was no longer a verbal exchange. A sharp intake of breath came from the rear of the vehicle immediately. Vanessa raised her gaze slowly, maintaining her composure and silence. Kyle, she stated, this is your final opportunity to take a seat and depart with some measure of self-respect. Kyle's thoughts had vanished. He was consumed by anger. Humiliated, vulnerable, and needing to regain command, he struck her. The sound was distinct, a smack of skin against skin. Her glasses moved slightly. Her head tilted a little due to the impact. Exclamations arose, escalating into a commotion. People stood up. Phones appeared. A voice called out from the rear. Vanessa simply blinked, then remained still. She carefully straightened her glasses, neatly arranged a strand of hair behind her ear, then fixed her gaze directly upon him. You have just committed a significant error. Kyle hesitated briefly, his hands still raised, his breathing now shallow. Who do you think you are? He asked, his voice softer. She inclined her head. You'll find out soon enough. Two rose back. The young man who had been quietly recording rose and walked to the rear of the car. He had observed something in her eyes, something unyielding, not fearful. It prompted his movement. A voice murmured, She's important. I believe she's someone. Another voice followed. Is that the chief's wife? That's the police chief's wife. And now Kyle was hearing the murmur. What? He said. No one answered, but the mood in the car shifted. It had gone from outrage to recognition. This wasn't just a woman on a train anymore. This was somebody. Vanessa stayed still. Her cheek stung. Her hand trembled just a little in her lap. But she didn't let it show. Instead, she reached for her phone, opened a text, typed 5 words, call me when you can. Sent. She glanced upward, not toward Kyle, but at the doors. The train was one stop from Curtis Park Station, and that was the extent of his remaining time. Curtis Park Station was less than 2 minutes away now. But for all those inside the train car, time began to lengthen. No one was speaking anymore. Not genuinely. There were hushed tones, murmurs, yes. But the atmosphere had changed, becoming concentrated and oppressive. Kyle sensed it. He disliked it. He positioned himself in the middle of the aisle, as if he had something yet to demonstrate. His gaze now moved frequently, scanning the passengers who avoided eye contact. He observed those recording, resenting their lack of laughter. They weren't fearful of him, either. Not anymore. Man, you're tripping, he mumbled. She started it, trying to appear superior. No one reacted. Across from him, Vanessa had repositioned her tote onto her lap. Her fingers were clenched around the straps, her thumb rhythmically stroking a small stitched detail. She felt no fear. However, anger simmered within her. A quiet anger, an anger that held back, an anger that was justified. Her skin still felt hot. The mark of his hand remained visible. She refrained from touching it. Maintaining a composed stance, she kept her shoulders straight. She was aware of the scrutiny, not only from those with phones, but also from the observant individuals who had witnessed similar incidents and felt powerless. Now, their attention was on her, and so was Kyle's. "You think you're better than me," he hissed suddenly. "That's what this is. You people always act like you're too good." Vanessa finally looked at him. Her voice was low. "I don't think I'm better than you. I think you're making choices you're going to regret." "You threatening me?" He shot back. "No," she said. "I'm warning you. There's a difference." The train gave a mechanical groan as it began slowing into Curtis Park. The lights flickered once overhead. Kyle turned toward the door, fidgeting. A woman 2 seats down whispered something to her boyfriend. He nodded subtly, moved his hand into his jacket pocket, a badge, an off-duty officer merely awaiting the signal. And then Kyle turned back one last time. "You ain't nothing but a loudmouth in a skirt," he spat. "Nobody gonna save you." And with that, he reared his hand back again. But this time someone moved. Not Vanessa, not the off-duty cop. A man, tall, with a beard and still wearing a dusty construction vest from work, moved quickly from the rear of the car. He seized Kyle's wrist as he started to swing and pulled it down forcefully. "Try that again, and I'll break your arm," the man stated, his voice calm but menacing. Kyle attempted to free himself, but was unable to. The man's grip was stronger and more resolute. "Finished?" he inquired. Kyle swore, recoiled, and stumbled toward the opposite wall of the train. He appeared like a trapped creature, snarling more from panic than from any sense of dignity. Vanessa rose. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't theatrical. Just even. She surveyed the car, noting the woman with her phone, the young man in the hoodie, the child in the back feigning disinterest. Then she looked at Kyle. "I won't file charges for what you just did," she stated, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "But someone will. Someone invariably does. And when they do, I hope it's recorded." The train emitted a hiss as the doors opened. Curtis Park Station. Light flooded in from the platform. There, on the platform, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers, stood Darius Kirkland. He wasn't wearing a uniform. It wasn't necessary. He wore a black button-down shirt and slacks, and his expression was stern and intense. He boarded the train. Silence filled the space. Kyle stared at him, puzzled. "Who?" Darius spoke, his tone direct. Kyle remained still. Darius advanced 1 step. Now, a badge appeared, revealed with quiet assurance. The name was visible. Kirkland. Kyle's gaze shifted to Vanessa. An understanding dawned. "That name, her." "Oh no," he breathed. The off-duty officer behind him placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go." "I didn't know." Kyle shouted. "Yo, I didn't know who she was." Darius said nothing. Vanessa stepped off the train first. She didn't look back. But the man who slapped her would never forget the moment he realized who she was, nor how close he came to losing a lot more than his pride. They walked Kyle off the platform like a child being removed from class for misbehaving. This wasn't a school setting, and no message would be sent home. The train departed behind them. Vanessa maintained a steady, even pace as she walked. Darius walked beside her, mostly silent. He didn't need to speak. His jaw was tense, not with anger, but with controlled composure. Years of policing had shown him the value of knowing when to speak and when silence was more impactful. Behind them, Kyle was guided to a bench close to the platform stairs. He was breathing rapidly, his eyes wide, still processing what had occurred. A plainclothes officer stood close by, observing with little visible emotion. Vanessa reduced her speed and then spoke softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm okay." Darius looked at her, his eyes showing a trace of gentleness for the first time since boarding the train. "I know you are," he replied, "but I'm not." He hesitated. "I saw the entire video before I arrived. The initial message I received was from Naomi Simmons. Do you recall her? From Housing Court?" Vanessa gave a single nod. She witnessed the event as it unfolded, communicating it to me in just 4 words. "Is this your wife?" Vanessa released a sigh that mingled amusement and weary comfort. "You should have observed the child in the 3rd row," she remarked. He attempted to disappear the instant that boy began to be noisy, resembling Darren when he would feign sleep to evade tasks. Darius laughed softly. "I long for that boy," she acknowledged, her eyes wandering across the platform. Many people on that train likely recognized this scenario. However, this time the events unfolded differently. He touched her shoulder gently. "It's because you didn't react," she said. "That alters everything." A few yards behind them, Kyle began to fall apart. Not from guilt, not yet, but from fear. The fog lifted, and the man he slapped was standing nearby, shaking hands with law enforcement, while his own hands were held beneath his thighs, like a child avoiding reprimand. An officer spoke to him, and his reply was abrupt and overly loud. Darius overheard. "I didn't even hit her that hard." He glanced at Vanessa, his expression remaining composed. "Do you mind if I handle this?" She gave an affirmative nod. "I trust you." Darius then proceeded back toward Kyle, his steps deliberate and controlled, as if approaching a speaker's platform rather than a bench. Kyle sat up straighter as he noticed Darius's approach. "Yo, look, I didn't know who she was, man. I didn't know she was, like, married to a cop. I believe she was simply just what?" Darius interrupted. "Tell me." Kyle's mouth opened, but he didn't speak. Darius sat beside him, maintaining a comfortable distance. "You thought she was merely a woman. Alone. An easy target." Kyle's lips tightened, seeking an explanation. "She was speaking her mind." "No," Darius responded, his voice calm. "She was demonstrating composure. That's not a common sight, is it? I didn't harm her in that way, though. You made contact with her. You placed your hands on her. Before an audience. Recorded on camera. And then there was another attempt." Kyle scanned the area, as if searching for support. But the platform was empty. There was no one to assist him. No one ever did for people like Vanessa. "That was intentional," Darius stated. "You're fortunate because she's extending understanding that others wouldn't. But don't misinterpret that as a sign of vulnerability." Kyle lowered his gaze. His earlier arrogance diminished to a smaller form. The inflated self-assurance had vanished. He appeared more like a boy now, lost, tired, and suddenly very aware of how much worse things could have been. "What's going to happen to me?" he asked. "That depends," Darius said. "Right now, you're being detained. There's an outstanding warrant on you for a missed court date from 3 months ago." Kyle's mouth dropped open. Unrelated, but not forgotten. Darius stood up. "And later?" "That depends on what kind of man you decide to be when you walk out of holding." He turned, not waiting for a reply, and returned to Vanessa, who was now seated close to a column, eyes closed in a brief moment of quiet. However, the complete story wasn't finished, and its full impact hadn't completely arrived. At least, not yet. They didn't depart the station immediately. Vanessa had taken a place on the lengthy metal bench beside the wall, sheltered by the weathered Curtis Park sign. She sat straight, legs crossed at the ankle, and her hands were finally relaxed. A stillness had returned, the type often present after a disturbance. Darius stood a short distance away, holding a phone to his ear and speaking softly. Vanessa couldn't discern his words, but she understood his demeanor. It was the voice he employed when rectifying another's blunder. Following a few minutes, he ended the call, approached her, and sat next to her. "They're taking him to county," he stated. "He isn't facing charges yet for the slap. Not unless you request it." Vanessa remained silent for a moment. She wasn't trying to be elusive. She simply needed a short time to consider what was most important. "I won't push," she stated following a brief silence. "Let the warrant take care of it. That's sufficient for now," Darius agreed slowly, nervously biting his lower lip. He acknowledged her fortunate position. They remained seated next to each other. People passed them on the platform, some offering curious looks, some murmuring as they recognized her from the videos already in circulation. Vanessa had experienced widespread online attention previously. However, nothing like this. Typically, the shared content consisted of excerpts from her addresses at city forums or housing events. Previously, a video of her embracing a woman who had recently won a child custody case had garnered thousands of likes. However, this situation was different. Now, she was the woman on the train, and her face, still faintly marked where Kyle's hand had landed, was circulating across timelines and news feeds in real time. She anticipated the consequences: comment sections, opinions, outrage, and debate. Some might describe her as a hero. Others might perceive her as lenient for not responding in kind. Still others would likely seek to place blame. Darius broke the silence. "Remember that speech I gave last week?" He began. "About dignity, public space, and consequence?" She replied, "Yes, I was in the front row." He continued, "I said every citizen deserves to move through their city without fear. That is the baseline, not the luxury." She nodded. He went on, "When I said that, I was thinking about everyone. Children walking to school, grandparents catching the bus, teachers, nurses, grocery clerks. I hadn't been thinking about you," she acknowledged. "I know," she said gently, "and I regret that I hadn't." Vanessa turned to him. "Please don't do that." He lowered his gaze. "You shouldn't have been in that situation." She offered a brief laugh. "Do you believe I haven't faced worse?" His eyes rose. "I've lived 53 years in this skin, Darius. On this earth, in this body. I've been followed, yelled at, disrespected, dismissed, and talked over. It simply so happened they were recorded." He showed no smile. Yet, he seemed to grasp the sentiment. "You've always been stronger than I remarked. "No," she replied. "I'm simply more experienced." A train whistle echoed as a train arrived at the station. A different vehicle, different travelers, the same city. A young woman in scrubs drew near carefully, her gaze shifting between them. "Excuse me, Mrs. Kirkland?" she inquired. Vanessa turned. "Yes, I just wanted to express my gratitude," she said, "for the way you manage him, for maintaining your dignity." Vanessa rose, offered her hand. "What's your name?" Rosa replied, "I'm a nurse at St. Joseph's." "You had a long shift?" Vanessa nodded. "You take care of people all day?" "Thank you." Rosa appeared taken aback by the courtesy. She offered a small nod and departed. Darius rose to stand next to his wife. "Let's go home." But Vanessa didn't move immediately. She glanced around the platform one last time, observing the train tracks, the benches, the signage, and the flow of people as if nothing had occurred. It felt as if time had restarted. "I'll ride the train tomorrow," she stated. "Are you certain?" "Yes." And the following day. And the day after that. "I refuse to be silenced simply because someone is unfamiliar with me," Darius said, placing a gentle hand on her back. However, as they departed the station, neither of them realized the extent to which this moment would affect those beyond the train car. This became clear when the news broke. By the time they arrived at their home in Southland Park, Vanessa's phone had received more than 20 notifications. Darius had received a significant influx of communication. Friends, journalists, colleagues, and individuals they hadn't spoken to in years suddenly recalled their contact information. She chose not to respond to most of these inquiries. The incident had already been reported in the local news by 9 p.m. One news source titled their report "Community Leader Assaulted on Light Rail. Suspect Apprehended at Station." Another opted for a more dramatic headline: "Slap on the Train Sparks Debate Over Civility and Race." However, the video clips were the content that spread most rapidly. A 16-second vertical video, filmed by someone sitting 3 rows back, captured Kyle's words. "This is our Lance." It showed the slap and the subsequent moment where she met his gaze, appearing unaffected by his action. Within hours, the video surpassed 100,000 views, then 200, and finally 500,000. Each comment offered an opinion. Some praised her composure, others questioned why no one intervened earlier, and predictably, some found fault. Daria was sitting on the bed's edge, looking at news articles, her jaw tight. Vanessa entered from the bathroom, her face freshly washed and her hair wrapped. "You should put that away," Vanessa said. Daria looked up. "I keep reading these comments. People analyzing what you should have said. What you didn't say. It's as if you were putting on a show. That's the internet." Daria replied, "I simply dislike seeing you transformed into a symbol." Vanessa lifted an eyebrow. "That has been occurring since I was 13 years old. The first instance I experienced being followed in a drugstore simply for wearing lip gloss marked a turning point." Daria sighed. "I know. I only wanted you to find some quiet." "I have quiet," she replied, "and I still do. That boy didn't deprive me of anything." In fact, he provided a space for me to express what I've always felt. He looked at her, pausing. That regardless of your identity, respect isn't gained through increased volume or physical force. It's demonstrated by how you regard those who are not indebted to you. She positioned herself beside him, carefully taking the phone from his grasp and placing it on the nightstand. You recall what you told the academy class last spring? She inquired. Which part? He responded. We don't train for revenge. We train for response. Darius chuckled softly. I borrowed that line from my grandfather. Well, you gave it meaning, she replied. It's the same reason I refrained from reacting with force today. You address situations as they arise, not according to others' expectations, but as they require. A pause. Did you see how many people were watching? She continued. If I had lost control, it wouldn't have been about him anymore. It would have become a completely different situation. Darius nodded slowly. You are correct. At that moment, a new message appeared on Vanessa's phone. This one was not from the press. It was from a mother of a high school student she'd represented 6 months earlier in a school discrimination case. She had defended him after he'd been suspended for what proved to be a false accusation by a teacher. The message stated, My son saw the video and said, That's Miss Kirkland. She's real. I just want you to know how much you matter to people like us. Thank you for being who you are. Vanessa looked at the message for a long moment. Then she gave the phone to Darius silently. He read it, exhaled, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to smile. You matter, he said. So do you, she replied. The following morning, while they were seated together on the porch enjoying coffee, a news van leisurely drove down the street. The vehicle didn't halt, but the camera within directed its view towards the house before proceeding onward. I suspect today will be more eventful than anticipated, he remarked. I believe every day is, Vanessa replied. She rose, stretched, and retrieved her tote bag near the door. Are you going out? He asked. Yes. They require my presence at the center. We have eviction hearings scheduled for this week. I will not be absent due to someone being unable to accept a woman speaking directly. Darius also rose. Desire a lift? She offered a smile. No, I will travel by train. She observed her intently for a moment. Are you certain? I want to be visible. Identical seat, identical time. Because I'm not the one who requires anonymity. However, as Vanessa resumed her schedule, the events that transpired on that train continued to resonate far beyond the station, impacting dinner conversations, classrooms, news organizations, and homes throughout the nation. Following those initial moments, video recordings of Vanessa Kirkland were shared across newsrooms, courtrooms, break rooms, and barbershops. The incident generated discussion in locations that seldom addressed individuals like her, middle-aged, black, composed during pressure, unaffected by disorder. Podcasts featured it. Community forums offered perspectives. National broadcasters attempted to contextualize it, as though it conformed to a predetermined narrative concerning race, gender, and power. However, the situation defied easy categorization. That was its compelling quality. Despite everything, Vanessa consistently took the same train, often securing the same seat when available. Whenever someone recognized her, they would offer a nod or a quiet expression of gratitude. On one occasion, an elderly gentleman approached her to simply state, I witnessed what occurred. I'm showing my granddaughter. I told her, this is how one maintains composure during a crisis. Vanessa, however, wasn't seeking acknowledgement. That's what made her actions so meaningful. She had navigated hardships previously. The difference was that the world hadn't been documenting it. The city organized a public forum 2 weeks later. Community safety, transportation, and law enforcement relations were the focus of the meeting. The hall was full. Darius was invited to speak. Attendees anticipated a discussion about crime statistics and updated patrol approaches. However, he chose to recount the story of the train. I wasn't present at the beginning, he stated from the podium. I wasn't seated beside her. I didn't observe the expression in his gaze or the stillness with which she remained while others spoke. But I was present when it concluded, and what I witnessed extended beyond my wife. He embodied restraint, strength, and a level of control that most of us only discuss in theory. He paused, looking out at the crowd. Her actions transcended mere self-preservation. She demonstrated that standing your ground doesn't always require physical force. Sometimes it involves maintaining composure when someone is attempting to undermine you. Vanessa remained silent that evening. She was seated in the second row, wearing a navy blazer and black slacks, her hands resting in her lap, observing, hearing, understanding. Afterward, as they headed back to the vehicle, a young reporter stepped forward. He appeared apprehensive, holding a microphone in one hand and a phone in the other. "Mrs. Kirkland," he began, "do you believe you represent something, given what transpired?" She regarded him. "I am not a symbol," she replied. "I am a woman. I was weary. I was on the train, returning home, and someone believed that entitled them to behave as though I lacked significance, but the manner in which it was addressed. Many are describing it as impactful." She remained composed. "What's impactful," she stated, "is learning how to maintain your composure in a world that persistently attempts to disrupt it." He began to pose another inquiry, but she raised her hand subtly. "That is all," she responded. "Have a good evening." She and Darius departed into the night, and the story, though no longer dominating news coverage, persisted. It resonated in discussions among friends, in classrooms, when instructors utilized it as a practical example. Reflecting on the events, many recalled the emotions they felt witnessing it, prompting introspection about their own responses, their own stillness, and their own sense of self-respect. Kyle Dunham appeared in court 3 days following his arrest. The court referenced his previous charges and imposed a 30-day detention while awaiting further investigation. Vanessa did not attend the court proceedings, stating that she had already expressed what she needed to. The legal center where she worked experienced an increase in support following the incident. Financial support arrived, and individuals registered to volunteer. A few referenced the video, but the majority expressed a desire to contribute to something impactful without needing fanfare. Vanessa Kirkland, in particular, continued her daily train journeys. That train, for better or worse, evolved into a visible representation of dignity in action. In a world often filled with distractions, individuals such as Vanessa Kirkland serve as a reminder of a truth that is often overlooked. True resilience isn't always loud. Occasionally, it remains still, speaks with composure, and stands firm. This isn't driven by a desire to triumph, but a determination to remain present. If this narrative resonated with you, prompted reflection, or evoked thoughts of someone familiar, please share it. Subscribe for further authentic stories similar to this one, highlighting how quiet strength can be more impactful than force and justice can manifest in unexpected ways. Remember, you never know who you might encounter on the train.